Terrence Jackson's face stung from the flight attendant's slap. Blood trickled from his lip as first-class passengers gasped. "Animals like you belong in economy," she hissed. Reaching for his phone, Terrence smiled. "Dad? It's happening again. Activate Protocol Avalanche." Then everything changed. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers who refuse to look away when injustice happens at 30,000 feet. Now, let's uncover how one slap on a luxury flight unleashed an avalanche that buried an entire airline system of discrimination. The plush leather of the first-class seat on Skyway Airlines Flight 237 from San Francisco to New York cushioned Terrence Jackson's 6'2" frame as he settled in for the 5-hour journey. At 27, the Harvard-educated son of tech billionaire Darius Jackson had the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in any room he entered. His tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than what most people earned in a month, but his demeanor remained unpretentious, even humble. The cabin gleamed with luxury. Ambient lighting cast a soft glow over polished wood accents and spacious seating. Flight attendants moved with practiced grace, offering champagne and hot towels to passengers who hadn't yet stowed their designer luggage. It was the type of service Skyway Airlines proudly featured in their commercials: attentive, personalized, and exclusive. For everyone except Terrence. Sandra Whitmore, a flight attendant with a tight blonde bun and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, worked the first-class cabin with mechanical efficiency. She graciously attended to the white businessman in 2A, asking about his drink preferences before takeoff. She warmly welcomed the elderly white couple in 3B and 3C, ensuring they were comfortable. When she reached Terrence in 1D, her smile vanished. "Ticket," she demanded, extending her hand with a snap of her fingers. Terrence pulled up his boarding pass on his phone. "Good afternoon." Sandra scrutinized the digital ticket longer than necessary, her brow furrowed as if searching for a flaw. Are you sure you're in the right seat?" "Yes, 1D. It's right there on the ticket," Terrence replied evenly, having experienced this particular dance too many times to count. "I'll need to see your ID," she insisted, glancing at the white passengers for whom she'd required no such verification. Terrence handed over his driver's license. Sandra studied it, then his face, then back to the ID, squinting as if detecting a forgery. "And how will you be paying for in-flight purchases?" Her tone suggested she already knew the answer: he couldn't afford anything. With this, Terrence presented his black American Express Centurion card, the invitation-only card that screamed wealth louder than any designer label. Sandra reluctantly returned his ID and moved on without offering him a pre-flight beverage. The next hour unfolded in a similar pattern. When Terrence pressed the call button to request a glass of water, Sandra ignored it for 20 minutes. When he finally caught her attention, she responded with an exasperated sigh, as if his basic request was an imposition. Meanwhile, she cheerfully refreshed drinks for white passengers without them even asking. A white passenger in 2B spilled his tomato juice, and Sandra rushed over with extra napkins and a sympathetic smile. "These things happen. Let me take care of that for you." Terrence observed silently, maintaining his composure. This wasn't his first encounter with prejudice, and it certainly wouldn't be his last. His father had taught him to pick his battles carefully. Sometimes it was better to let small aggressions slide than to exhaust yourself fighting every slight. But the situation escalated when dinner service began. Sandra accidentally knocked over Terrence's glass of water, soaking his laptop. "So sorry," she said without a hint of regret as she dropped a handful of cocktail napkins on the puddle. Terrence dabbed at his $1,000 device. "May I have some more napkins, please?" "We're short on supplies," Sandra replied despite the visible stack on her cart. The white businessman in 2A frowned, noticing the interaction. He caught Terrence's eye with a look that acknowledged the unfairness. This silent recognition from a witness seemed to irritate Sandra even more. When dinner trays came around, Terrence received his last, after Sandra had served everyone else. His chicken was cold, his vegetables soggy. When he politely mentioned this, Sandra rolled her eyes. "If you have complaints about our service, perhaps you should fly private next time," she said loudly enough for others to hear, implying he couldn't possibly afford such luxury. The final straw came when Terrence requested the flight attendant's name to file a complaint. "I'd like your full name for a customer service report," he said calmly. Sandra's face flushed. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all. I'm simply asking for your name." "I know your type," she hissed, leaning closer. "Always looking for a handout or a lawsuit." "I'd like to speak to the purser, please," Terrence insisted, still maintaining his composure despite the blatant racism. Something in Sandra snapped. Perhaps it was the fact that other passengers were now openly watching. Perhaps it was Terrence's unflappable dignity that she couldn't seem to break. Whatever the reason, she did the unthinkable. Her hand flew across Terrence's face with a crack that silenced the entire cabin. The force split his bottom lip, drawing blood. "Animals like you belong in economy," she spat. The first-class cabin froze in collective shock. Several passengers instinctively reached for their phones to record. The businessman in 2A stood up in protest. The elderly couple gasped. Terrence touched his bleeding lip, a strange calm settling over him. He'd spent his entire life trying to avoid using his father's influence, preferring to make his own way in the world. But in this moment, with the sting of the slap still burning his cheek and the taste of blood on his tongue, something shifted inside him. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Dad? It's happening again. Activate protocol Avalanche." His voice was steady, but those who looked closely might have noticed the slightest tremor in his hands, not from fear, but from a lifetime of contained rage finally finding its outlet. The system that had protected people like Sandra for generations was about to experience something it rarely faced: consequences. Oakland, California, 1992. 9-year-old Darius Jackson huddled under a thin blanket as rain leaked through the roof of their small apartment. His mother worked 3 jobs, yet they still barely had enough to eat. While other kids in his class talked about new video games and trips to Disneyland, Darius spent his evenings figuring out how to repair the family's second-hand computer, fascinated by its potential. By 16, he was writing code that local businesses paid good money for. By 20, he had dropped out of community college to launch his first startup. By 30, Vertex Technologies was revolutionizing cloud computing. At 40, Darius Jackson became the 3rd black billionaire in American history. But money couldn't shield him or his family from racism. When Darius tried to purchase his first luxury home in Attendant, California, the real estate agent mysteriously stopped returning his calls after their initial meeting. When he walked into high-end stores, security guards followed him. When he drove his Ferrari, police pulled him over for routine checks that somehow never seemed routine for his white counterparts. His son Terrence experienced the same treatment despite being born into privilege. When Terrence was just 7, a teacher accused him of cheating because his math skills were too advanced for someone like him. At 12, a neighbor called security when he was swimming in his own family's pool at their vacation home. Each incident left scars that wealth could not heal. The breaking point came when Terrence was 16. He had forgotten his key and was trying to enter their Palo Alto mansion through the garage when police cruisers screeched into the driveway, responding to a neighbor's call about a suspicious person. Despite Terrence's explanation, the officers forced him to the ground, pressing a knee into his back as they handcuffed him. They ignored his pleas to call his father to verify his identity. One officer pressed his gun against Terrence's temple when the terrified teen tried to explain that his wallet with ID was in his backpack. "Move again and I'll blow your brains out, boy," the officer had threatened. Darius arrived home to find his only child face down on the concrete, surrounded by police. Even after Darius proved they lived there, the officers offered no apology. Their report would later claim Terrence had been aggressive and non-compliant. That night, as Darius applied antiseptic to the cuts on his son's face from being pressed into the driveway, he made a promise: "This will never happen again. Not to you. Not if I can help it." Thus, Protocol Avalanche was born, a comprehensive, multi-layered response system designed to address racial discrimination with overwhelming force. Darius assembled a team of civil rights attorneys, media specialists, corporate influence experts, and investigators who could be activated with a single call. The protocol was designed not just to address individual incidents but to expose and dismantle the systems that allowed them to happen. "An avalanche doesn't just knock down one tree," Darius explained to his son. "It reshapes the entire mountainside." But Terrence had grown wary of using his father's influence or wealth. He wanted to succeed on his own merits, to be judged by his character rather than his bank account. Throughout college at Harvard and his early career at a venture capital firm, he tried to blend in, to avoid confrontation, to be "one of the good ones," as white society might say. He drove modest cars, wore understated clothes, spoke softly, laughed at offensive jokes, and swallowed his pride more times than he could count. He never activated Protocol Avalanche, not when he was denied an apartment despite perfect credit, not when he was followed by store security, not even when a taxi refused to pick him up in the rain. "I need to fight my own battles," he told his father. Darius understood but kept the protocol ready. "Some battles are too big for one person," he'd remind his son. "Sometimes you need reinforcements." Now, 30,000 feet above the American heartland, with a flight attendant's handprint still visible on his face, Terrence had finally called in those reinforcements. For the first time in his adult life, he had activated Protocol Avalanche. Within minutes of his call, Skyway Airlines CEO Julia Harrington received an urgent message during a board meeting in Chicago. Vertex Technologies, their largest corporate client responsible for over $60 million in annual business travel, had suspended all activity with the airline, effective immediately. No explanation was given, but the timing suggested it wasn't a coincidence. As social media exploded with videos of the slap, Skyway's communication department scrambled to contain the damage. But they had no idea what was coming. Protocol Avalanche wasn't designed just to respond to an incident. It was designed to expose the entire system that made such incidents possible. "Flight 237, this is Skyway Operations," the pilot announced, his voice unusually tense. "We've been instructed to make an emergency landing in Chicago." Sandra Whitmore's face drained of color as she was summoned to the cockpit. She still didn't know who Terrence was. She didn't know about Protocol Avalanche. She didn't know that her entire world was about to collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. As the plane began its unexpected descent, Terrence Jackson closed his eyes. There was no satisfaction in what was coming, only a weary resignation that once again, money and power were required to obtain what should have been freely given: basic human dignity. The hashtag Skyway Slapgate started trending nationwide within 40 minutes of the first video being uploaded. By the time Flight 237 made its emergency landing at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, the clip had been viewed over 2 million times. The footage was damning in its clarity: a uniformed Skyway Airlines flight attendant striking a calm, well-dressed black passenger across the face hard enough to draw blood, followed by a racial slur clearly captured on the audio. No context could justify what millions of people were witnessing. As Terrence Jackson deplaned in Chicago, walking with the quiet dignity that was his hallmark, airport security escorted a visibly agitated Sandra Whitmore in the opposite direction. She protested loudly, insisting that Terrence had been threatening, and that she had acted in self-defense, claims directly contradicted by multiple videos shot from different angles throughout the cabin. "Do you know who I am?" Terrence heard her demand of the security officers. "I've been with this airline for 15 years. The irony wasn't lost on him. How many times had black people been accused of playing the "do you know who I am" card when simply asking to be treated with basic respect? In a private lounge at O'Hare, Skyway Airlines CEO Julia Harrington paced frantically while her assistant tried to reach Darius Jackson. "He's not taking my calls," the assistant reported. "Try again," Julia insisted, her face ashen as she watched her company's stock price drop in real time on her tablet. "Offer a personal apology, a private jet, anything he wants." What Julia didn't understand was that Protocol Avalanche wasn't designed to be stopped by apologies or perks. It had already been set in motion, and its momentum was building by the second. At Vertex Technologies' headquarters in Silicon Valley, Zoe Washington strode through the executive floor with purposeful steps. At 32, the brilliant attorney had known Terrence since childhood. They'd grown up in the same wealthy enclave after both their families broke through racial barriers in tech and finance. Now, as Vertex's chief legal counsel, she was the sword arm of Protocol Avalanche. Conference room, now, she commanded her team of 12 attorneys who had been assembled within minutes of Terrence's call. "I want everything on Skyway Airlines. History of discrimination complaints, hiring practices, training manuals, settlement records, everything." Within the hour, Vertex Technologies issued an official statement. They had suspended all business with Skyway Airlines indefinitely following a disturbing incident of racial discrimination against a Vertex executive. The statement didn't name Terrence, but it didn't need to. The videos made the connection obvious. Zoe's next call was to Vertex's travel department. "Contact American Airlines, Delta, United, and JetBlue. Tell them we're looking to sign an exclusive corporate travel contract to replace our Skyway agreement. $60 million annually, minimum 3-year commitment. Let them know this is about values alignment and that we're meeting with all 4 carriers this week." The message to the airline industry was clear. There was blood in the water, and Skyway's competitors could feast on its largest corporate client if they moved quickly and took a public stand against discrimination. By late afternoon, Skyway's stock had fallen 17%. Financial analysts scrambled to assess the damage as other companies began reviewing their own contracts with the airline. The Department of Transportation announced a preliminary inquiry into the incident. Civil rights organizations issued statements of condemnation. Cable news networks ran the footage on repeat. Through it all, Terrence maintained his composure. He declined interview requests and issued no personal statements. Protocol Avalanche wasn't about personal vendettas or public attention, it was about systemic change. In a luxury hotel suite in Chicago, Terrence finally allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. Alone with his father on a secure video call, he touched his swollen lip and asked the question that had haunted him his entire life: "Will it ever change, Dad? Really change?" Darius Jackson's face on the screen showed the weariness of a man who had fought this battle for decades. "Not without a fight, son. That's why we built the protocol. That's why we use every advantage we have." "I feel like I failed," Terrence admitted. "I tried to handle it her way, politely, calmly. Look where that got me." "You didn't fail," Darius countered firmly. "The system failed. Again. That's why we're taking it down." Meanwhile, Sandra Whitmore sat in a sterile conference room at Skyway headquarters, facing the airline's increasingly hostile human resources director and a stone-faced corporate attorney. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" the HR director demanded. "Do you know who Terrence Jackson is?" "How should I know?" Sandra replied defensively. "He didn't act like he was anyone special. He's the son of Darius Jackson, founder of Vertex Technologies, our biggest corporate client. And you assaulted him on camera." The blood drained from Sandra's face as reality finally dawned on her. She'd slapped a billionaire's son. Worse, she'd slapped a black billionaire's son while using a racial slur, on camera, in front of dozens of witnesses. "It was a misunderstanding," she stammered. "He was being difficult. I felt threatened." The corporate attorney slid a tablet across the table, showing her the viral videos from multiple angles. "Exactly which part of this shows him threatening you, Ms. Whitmore?" Back at O'Hare, Julia Harrington finally managed to get through, not to Darius, but to Zoe Washington. "Please," Julia pleaded, "we want to make this right. We'll fire the flight attendant immediately. We'll compensate Mr. Jackson generously. Just call off whatever this is. Zoe's response was measured but unyielding. This isn't about one flight attendant or one incident, Ms. Harrington. Protocol Avalanche is already in motion. If you want to mitigate the damage, I suggest full cooperation with our investigation into Skyway's practices. Investigation? What investigation? You have no authority to. We have the authority of public opinion, Ms. Harrington. We have the authority of the market. And by tomorrow morning, we'll have the authority of the DOT, the EEOC, and any other regulatory body with jurisdiction over your airline. The question isn't whether there will be an investigation, it's how much it will cost you when it's done. As night fell over Chicago, Terrence Jackson watched the sunset from his hotel window, thinking about Sandra Whitmore. She wasn't an anomaly. She wasn't just one bad apple. She was the product of a system that had protected people like her for generations, a system that was now, finally, facing its reckoning. Have you ever wondered what happens behind the scenes when corporations claim they're addressing discrimination? What really goes on when they say they're taking the matter seriously or conducting an internal review? The answers might shock you, just as they shocked Terrence Jackson when Zoe Washington's team uncovered the truth about Skyway Airlines. If this story is making your blood boil, hit that like button right now. Comment 1 if you believe corporations should face serious consequences for enabling discrimination. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that pull back the curtain on systemic injustice in America. Are you ready to see how deep the rabbit hole goes? Let's continue this journey. The morning after the slap heard around the world, Zoe Washington sat in her temporary office at Vertex's Chicago satellite location, surrounded by stacks of documents. Her team had worked through the night, following the trail of Skyway's discrimination complaints going back 15 years. What they found painted a disturbing picture. It's not just pattern and practice, she told Terrence over a secure line. It's policy. Skyway Airlines had received over 300 formal complaints alleging racial discrimination from passengers in the past decade alone. Not a single one had resulted in disciplinary action against an employee. Instead, the company had developed an elaborate system for burying these complaints. First, customer service representatives were trained to flag racial discrimination claims for special handling. These complaints were routed to a specialized team that offered modest flight vouchers and required complainants to sign broad releases preventing them from pursuing further action. For those who refused the vouchers, Skyway deployed delay tactics, investigating claims for months until complainants gave up. If someone persisted, the airline's legal team would send threatening letters suggesting that false accusations could result in defamation lawsuits. Most disturbing was the discovery that Skyway maintained a confidential, customer watch list of passengers who had filed discrimination complaints. These passengers would be flagged in the booking system and subjected to additional scrutiny on future flights. They blacklisted the victims, Zoe explained, disgust evident in her voice. And get this, Sandra Whitmore has been the subject of 11 previous complaints from black first-class passengers. Each time, Skyway determined there was insufficient evidence of discrimination. Terrence wasn't surprised. What about other employees? That's where it gets interesting, Zoe replied. We found an internal performance evaluation describing Sandra as especially vigilant about maintaining the exclusive atmosphere of the first-class cabin. Reading between the lines, she was being praised for keeping certain passengers out of premium spaces. As Protocol Avalanche gathered momentum, other victims of Skyway's discrimination began coming forward. James Thompson, a prominent black surgeon, shared his experience of being repeatedly asked to show his first-class ticket on a Skyway flight. Aisha Reynolds, a marketing executive, described being ignored by flight attendants while white passengers received attentive service. Michael Williams, a retired NBA player, recounted being asked to move from his first-class seat because a white passenger would be more comfortable there. Each story followed the same pattern: discriminatory treatment, followed by dismissive responses when they complained. The sheer volume of similar experiences made it impossible to dismiss them as isolated incidents. Meanwhile, the Department of Transportation launched an official investigation into Skyway's practices. Investigators requested years of complaint records, employee training materials, and internal communications about discrimination incidents. The airline stock continued its freefall, dropping another 12% by midday. Julia Harrington called an emergency board meeting, desperate to contain the damage. "We need to get ahead of this," she insisted. "Offer Jackson a settlement, $20 million, $50 million, whatever it takes." Bradley Thompson, Skyway's executive vice president of operations, nodded in agreement. At 61, Thompson had been with the airline for nearly 3 decades, overseeing its transformation from a regional carrier to a major national airline. What Julia didn't know was that Thompson had personally designed many of the policies now under scrutiny. "I can handle this," Thompson assured her. "I've dealt with these situations before." Indeed he had. Before joining Skyway, Thompson had worked for 2 other airlines, both of which had settled discrimination lawsuits against him personally. Those settlements included non-disclosure agreements that kept his history hidden when Skyway hired him. Thompson reached out to Terrence directly, bypassing Zoe, with an offer, $30 million in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and a statement that the incident had been resolved to his satisfaction. Terrence's response was brief. "This isn't about money." For Terrence, this had never been about financial compensation. Protocol Avalanche wasn't designed to extract settlements, it was created to force systemic change. The slap had been painful and humiliating, but it was merely the visible symptom of a much deeper disease. Treating the symptom wouldn't cure the illness. As the investigation deepened, more troubling patterns emerged. Skyway's hiring practices showed significant racial disparities, with black employees disproportionately concentrated in lower-paying, less visible roles. The airline's training materials included coded language about passenger profiling and maintaining the appropriate atmosphere in premium cabins. Perhaps most damning was the discovery of an email chain between Thompson and other executives discussing a previous discrimination complaint. "Handle it the usual way," Thompson had written. "These people are just looking for handouts." When confronted with this evidence, Sandra Whitmore made a fateful decision. She went on television to defend herself. In a cable news interview, she portrayed herself as the victim of cancel culture and social media mobbing. "I've never discriminated against anyone," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. "I was just doing my job, maintaining standards in the first-class cabin. Mr. Jackson was being difficult, and I felt threatened. This is all being blown out of proportion because his father is rich and powerful." The interview backfired spectacularly. Viewers noted that she referred to Terrence as "these people" multiple times during the segment. When the host asked about her "animals belong in economy" comment captured on video, she claimed it had been taken out of context, though she couldn't explain what context would make such a statement appropriate. By the end of the week, other corporations began distancing themselves from Skyway. 3 major companies announced they were reviewing their corporate travel contracts. The airline's competitors seized the opportunity, launching campaigns emphasizing their commitment to respectful service for all passengers. Terrence watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling oddly detached. The system was being exposed, just as Protocol Avalanche had been designed to do. But exposure alone wouldn't guarantee change. The hardest part was still to come. Every movement for justice faces pushback. Every attempt to change an entrenched system meets resistance. For Terrence Jackson, the backlash began with whispers that grew into shouts, with subtle threats that became overt intimidation. But when you've spent a lifetime facing discrimination, you develop a certain resilience, a strength that those who've never been tested can scarcely imagine. Bradley Thompson didn't become an airline executive by backing down from challenges. As Skyway airline stock continued its downward spiral and corporate clients jumped ship, the 61-year-old executive deployed countermeasures honed through decades of damage control. First came the media manipulation. Through industry connections and favors owed, Thompson planted stories questioning Terrence's character. Sources close to the situation suggested that Terrence had been intoxicated on the flight, had made inappropriate advances toward Sandra, had demanded special treatment because of his father's wealth. None of these claims were true, but truth had never been Thompson's priority. Creating doubt was enough, sufficient uncertainty to muddy the waters of public opinion. Next came the political pressure. Airline industry lobbyists began making calls to friendly legislators, framing the situation as an attack on American business by social justice warriors with an agenda. Within days, a senator with significant skyway operations in his state called for a congressional inquiry into social media mob justice and its impact on the airline industry. The third prong of Thompson's strategy targeted Terrence Jackson directly. Whispering campaigns suggested that Vertex Technologies' government contracts might face additional scrutiny if the Jacksons continued their crusade against Skyway. It was the corporate equivalent of a mob protection racket. Nice company you've got there, shame if something happened to it. Throughout this counterattack, Sandra Whitmore became an unlikely cause célèbre for certain segments of American society. Conservative media outlets portrayed her as a hardworking woman being persecuted for one mistake by privileged elites. A crowdfunding campaign for her legal defense raised over $200,000 in 3 days. Sandra leaned into this new role with surprising skill, giving tearful interviews about her 20-year career, destroyed in an instant. She never mentioned race directly, but her supporters filled in the blanks, casting her as the victim of reverse discrimination and cancel culture. "All I did was maintain standards," she repeated in interview after interview. Is that a crime now? For Terrence, watching this narrative unfold was both familiar and disturbing. He'd seen this playbook his entire life. The way discrimination was reframed as maintaining standards, the way victims became villains in the retelling, the way power protected itself by any means necessary. "They're turning her into a martyr," he told Zoe during their daily strategy call. "And painting me as an entitled rich kid throwing a tantrum." "Let them try," Zoe replied with characteristic determination. "We have the facts, we have the evidence, and we have the videos." Thompson can spin all he wants, but he can't change what millions of people saw with their own eyes. Still, the pressure took its toll. Vertex Technologies shareholders began expressing concerns about the controversy's impact on the company's stock price. Several board members suggested that perhaps it was time to move on for the good of the business. Terrence pushed back forcefully. This company was built on principles as much as profits, he reminded them. If we back down now, what message does that send? That discrimination is acceptable as long as it's profitable to ignore it. The resistance intensified when Jordan Miller, a white flight attendant who had worked with Sandra for years, initially agreed to testify about her history of discriminatory behavior, then abruptly withdrew after receiving threatening phone calls at his home. "I'm sorry," he told Zoe, voice shaking. "They know where I live. They mentioned my daughter by name." The intimidation campaign extended to other potential witnesses. Former Skyway employees who had spoken to Zoe's team reported similar threats. The message was clear: cross Skyway, and there would be consequences. Terrence tried to maintain his resolve, but doubt began to creep in. Was this battle worth the collateral damage? Was he putting others at risk for his principles? The weight of responsibility pressed down on him with each new development. The lowest point came when he returned to his hotel room after a meeting with DOT investigators to find a note slipped under his door: "Back off now, or next time it won't just be a slap." Terrence stared at the note, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He didn't fear for himself, he had security, resources, protection. But what about Jordan Miller? What about the other whistleblowers who didn't have his advantages? That night, Skyway delivered its most aggressive offer yet. $50 million, no admission of wrongdoing, complete confidentiality. The implicit message: take the money and walk away. For a moment, just a moment, Terrence considered it. Not for the money, but for the peace it promised. An end to the threats, the media circus, the strain on his father's company. He called Darius to discuss the offer, expecting his father to remind him of their principles, to reinforce the importance of seeing Protocol Avalanche through to completion. Instead, Darius was quiet for a long moment after hearing about the offer. "It's your decision, son," he finally said. "You're the one who was slapped. You're the one whose dignity was violated. Protocol Avalanche was always meant to be a tool for you to use, not an obligation for you to fulfill." "What would you do?" Terrence asked. Darius sighed, a heavy sound that carried more than just weariness. "I've been fighting this fight for longer than you've been alive. Sometimes I wonder if anything really changes. But then I think about your children someday, and their children. What world do we leave them if we always take the money and walk away?" After they hung up, Terrence stood at his hotel window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. $50 million would let him disappear, start fresh somewhere else, leave this ugliness behind. But the ugliness would remain for others who couldn't afford to escape it. The note threatening him lay on the desk. Terrence picked it up, feeling its weight, not just the paper, but the hatred and fear behind it. Thompson and his allies were scared, desperate. They wouldn't be fighting so hard if Protocol Avalanche wasn't working. Terrence took a deep breath and made his decision. He picked up his phone and called Zoe. "Tell Skyway the answer is no," he said. "And then double the investigation team. We're not backing down." The cameras didn't capture the moment Terrence Jackson finally broke down. There were no witnesses to his vulnerability, no viral videos of his pain. Alone in his father's Silicon Valley mansion, the carefully constructed composure he'd maintained for the public finally crumbled. "I can't do this anymore," he confessed, his voice cracking as he paced the study where his father had built an empire. "Every day it's something new. Death threats. Character assassination. They're dragging up girlfriends from college to say I was controlling. They found a professor who claims I was aggressive in class debates." Darius Jackson watched his son from his leather chair, saying nothing, allowing Terrence the space to release emotions he'd been containing for weeks. "What's the point?" Terrence continued, anger giving way to exhaustion. "We expose one Sandra Whitmore, and there are thousands more waiting to take her place. We force one company to change its policies, and a dozen others continue business as usual. Will anything ever really change?" Darius rose slowly from his chair, more slowly than he once had. At 63, the tech titan still commanded respect in any room he entered, but close observers had noticed subtle changes in recent months: weight loss, occasional winces of pain, appointments that couldn't be discussed. "Come with me," he said simply. Darius led his son through the mansion to a room Terrence had rarely entered, his father's private study. Unlike the main study where Darius conducted business, this smaller room contained personal mementos and family photographs. Darius unlocked a cabinet and removed a worn leather folder. "I've never shown you these," he said, opening the folder to reveal newspaper clippings yellowed with age. "Your grandfather, my father, was arrested 17 times during the civil rights movement. He marched with Dr. King in Selma. He registered voters in Mississippi. Each time he was beaten, jailed, humiliated, and each time he went back." Terrence examined the clippings in silence, seeing his family history in a new light. "He never saw the promised land," Darius continued. "He died thinking perhaps his sacrifices had been in vain. But they weren't. They made it possible for me to build Vertex. They made it possible for you to walk into Harvard like you belonged there, because you did." Darius closed the folder carefully. "The fight is never finished in one generation, son. We move the line forward as far as we can, then pass the baton." Something in his father's tone made Terrence look up sharply. "Dad? What aren't you telling me?" Darius held his son's gaze for a long moment before answering. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed 3 months ago. The words hit Terrence like a physical blow. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want this fight to be about me or my legacy. It needed to be about what's right. Darius placed a hand on his son's shoulder. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less. Protocol Avalanche may be my last contribution to moving that line forward. I need to know it made a difference. Terrence embraced his father, feeling the shocking frailty of the man who had always seemed invincible. In that moment, the fight against Skyway Airlines transformed from a personal grievance into something far more profound. A father and son's final collaboration, a generational passing of the torch. While the Jacksons reconnected with their purpose, Zoe Washington made a breakthrough that would change everything. One of her investigators discovered that Bradley Thompson had been systematically deleting emails related to discrimination complaints, but he'd overlooked the company's automatic backup system. The recovered emails revealed a coordinated effort to silence complaints and intimidate witnesses. In one particularly damning exchange, Thompson had personally instructed human resources to make the problem go away regarding a black passenger's complaint against Sandra Whitmore from 3 years earlier. More disturbing still were Thompson's emails to Sandra herself, coaching her on how to handle difficult passengers without leaving evidence of discriminatory intent. His instructions included coded language for targeting black passengers in first class. Maintain cabin standards for passengers who don't match our core demographic. Armed with this evidence, Zoe prepared to approach the Department of Transportation investigators, only to discover that Thompson had already reached them first. Suddenly, the DOT's initial enthusiasm for the investigation cooled. Requests for documents went unanswered. Scheduled interviews were postponed indefinitely. He got to them, Zoe told Terrence during an encrypted call. I don't know how, but he did. Meanwhile, the flight attendant who had initially agreed to testify, Jordan Miller, had disappeared entirely. His phone was disconnected, his apartment vacant. Skyway claimed he had resigned for personal reasons. The message was clear, the system protected its own. For every piece of evidence they uncovered, Thompson and his allies erected new barriers. For every witness they found, intimidation tactics ensured silence. That evening, as Terrence discussed strategy with Zoe and his father, Skyway delivered its final offer, $100 million, no admission of wrongdoing, absolute confidentiality. More money than most discrimination victims could imagine, delivered with an implicit threat, take this, or get nothing. They're desperate, Zoe observed. But they still don't understand what this is about. Darius nodded in agreement. They think everything has a price. Terrence stared at the offer letter, thinking about his father's diagnosis, about Jordan Miller's disappearance, about the seemingly endless resources aligned against them. For the first time, he seriously considered taking the settlement. Maybe we've pushed as far as we can, he suggested quietly. Maybe we take the money and use it to fight other battles, fund other causes. Neither Zoe nor Darius immediately rejected the idea. They understood the toll this fight was taking, the reality that perfect justice was rarely achieved. Perhaps this was as much as they could hope for, a record settlement that would make other companies think twice, even without formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Sleep on it, Darius advised. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. That night, Terrence barely slept, torn between pragmatism and principle. By morning, he was leaning toward acceptance. Protocol Avalanche had exposed the system, forced Skyway to offer unprecedented compensation, and raised public awareness. Perhaps that was victory enough. He was about to call Zoe with his decision when his secure phone, the one only she and his father had the number for, rang with an unfamiliar caller ID. Mr. Jackson. The voice was tense, nervous. You don't know me, but I know what happened to you. My name is Jordan Miller. I'm ready to talk, about everything. Jordan Miller had never considered himself particularly brave. At 35, the senior flight attendant had spent 13 years with Skyway Airlines, keeping his head down and collecting his paycheck. He'd witnessed Sandra Whitmore's behavior countless times, had seen the systematic discrimination, had even been complicit through his silence. But something about the slap, the naked aggression, the unmasked hatred, had finally shattered his complacency. "I should have done something sooner," Jordan admitted, sitting across from Terrence and Zoe in a nondescript hotel room 30 miles outside Chicago. His hands trembled slightly as he sipped his coffee. "I knew what Sandra was like. We all did. Why come forward now?" Zoe asked, her tone professional but not unkind. Jordan placed a small external hard drive on the table. "Because I've been collecting evidence for years. I just never had the courage to use it." The drive contained hundreds of files meticulously organized by date, emails forwarded from Jordan's work account, surreptitiously recorded conversations, photographs of internal memos, training documents with troubling instructions about passenger profiling. "After the incident with you," Jordan explained to Terrence, "I knew they'd start deleting everything. So I grabbed what I could before they locked me out of the system." Jordan's journey from passive bystander to active whistleblower hadn't been simple or straightforward. He'd witnessed Sandra's discriminatory behavior for years, had seen the complaints disappear, had attended the training sessions where flight attendants were taught to maintain cabin standards through coded language for racial profiling. "The first time I noticed what was happening was about 8 years ago," Jordan recalled. Sandra removed a black family from first class, claiming their tickets were invalid. They had proper tickets, I saw them myself. When they filed a complaint, it vanished into the system. That's when I started paying attention. Over the years, Jordan had witnessed dozens of similar incidents. He'd seen Sandra deliberately provide substandard service to black passengers in premium cabins, had heard her make racial comments in the galley, had watched her falsely accuse black passengers of being disruptive when they simply asked for the same service white passengers received without question. "Why didn't you report it?" Terrence asked without judgment. Jordan's expression revealed both shame and resignation. "I tried, once. I went to HR after Sandra called a passenger a racial slur in the galley. 2 weeks later, I was reassigned to international routes with lower pay and worse hours. The message was clear." After that, Jordan had adopted a different approach. If he couldn't fight the system directly, he would document it. Each incident, each email, each policy change that encoded discrimination in bureaucratic language, all carefully saved and dated. "I never thought I'd actually use any of it," Jordan admitted. "I told myself I was just protecting myself, creating insurance. But after I saw what happened to you, after I saw the videos." His voice trailed off, and Terrence finished the thought, "You couldn't stay silent anymore." Jordan nodded. "They tried to buy my silence. Thompson offered me a promotion to purser if I'd say I witnessed you being aggressive toward Sandra. When I refused, the threat started. The threats had escalated quickly from professional consequences to personal danger." Jordan's teenage daughter had been followed home from school. His elderly mother had received strange calls asking about her home security system. The message was unmistakable. "That's when I disappeared," Jordan explained. "I packed what I could, sent my daughter to stay with her mother in Colorado, and went off the grid. But I kept thinking about what would happen if I stayed quiet. How many more people would be humiliated, dehumanized, while I did nothing?" The evidence Jordan provided was devastating in its comprehensiveness. Emails from Bradley Thompson explicitly instructed cabin crew on how to discourage certain passengers from becoming too comfortable in premium spaces. Training materials included coded scenarios for identifying passengers who might make other customers uncomfortable, all featuring examples with stereotypically black names or characteristics. Most damning was an audio recording of Thompson himself instructing a group of flight attendants including Sandra, "First class is our showcase product. Our premium customers have certain expectations about who they sit next to. Your job is to manage those expectations without creating legal liability." As Zoe examined the files, her expression grew increasingly determined. This isn't just evidence of individual discrimination. This is proof of systematic policy. For Terrence, Jordan's courage put his own momentary hesitation into perspective. This man had risked everything, his career, his safety, his family's security, to do what was right. How could Terrence consider taking a settlement when others were showing such extraordinary courage? "What happens now?" Jordan asked. "Now," Zoe replied, "we go on offense." Within hours, Zoe had arranged secure transportation to get Jordan to Washington, D.C., where he would meet with senior Department of Transportation officials under whistleblower protection. The evidence would be provided simultaneously to federal investigators, civil rights organizations, and selected journalists to ensure it couldn't be buried. But Bradley Thompson had spies everywhere. Somehow, he learned of Jordan's reappearance and the evidence he provided. His response was as predictable as it was desperate. He tried to buy Jordan's silence. The meeting took place in an anonymous hotel room much like the one where Jordan had met with Terrence and Zoe. Thompson arrived alone, carrying a briefcase. $500,000, Thompson offered without preamble, placing a contract on the table. "Sign this NDA, hand over your evidence, and disappear for real this time. No one needs to know you were involved." What Thompson didn't know was that Jordan was wearing a wire, with federal agents monitoring the conversation from the adjacent room. When Jordan hesitated, appearing to consider the offer, Thompson grew bolder. "Miller, be smart about this. These people don't care about you. Once they get what they want, you'll be discarded. Take the money and start fresh somewhere else." "What about the threats against my family?" Jordan asked. Thompson's response was chilling in its casualness. "Those will stop, of course. This all goes away if you're smart. If not." He let the implication hang in the air. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Thompson?" "I'm offering you an opportunity," Thompson replied smoothly. $500,000 to walk away from a mess you didn't create. Or you can be a hero for 5 minutes, then spend years looking over your shoulder, unemployable in the industry, wondering if today's the day someone decides to make an example of you. Jordan appeared to waver, exactly as the agents had instructed him to do. "I need to think about it." "Don't think too long," Thompson warned, sliding a burner phone across the table. "Call that number with your answer within 24 hours. After that, the offer expires, and so do the guarantees of your safety." As Thompson left the room, he had no idea that his attempted bribery and threats had been recorded, or that federal agents were already preparing warrants based on his statements. He believed he was containing the situation, as he had contained so many others throughout his career. What he didn't understand was that Protocol Avalanche wasn't designed to be contained. It was designed to expose entire systems, to create cascading revelations that no single action could stop. Like the natural disaster it was named for, once set in motion, it could only run its course. For the first time since the slap that started it all, Terrence felt something like hope. Not just for resolution of his own incident, but for the possibility of genuine, systemic change. "Your father would be proud," Zoe told him after hearing about Jordan's successful sting operation. "He's not gone yet," Terrence replied with a sad smile. But they both knew Darius was failing quickly, his once powerful frame diminished by the aggressive cancer treatments. The question now was whether he would live to see Protocol Avalanche complete its work, to witness the avalanche reach the valley floor and reshape the landscape. The 47th floor of Skyway Airlines Chicago headquarters offered panoramic views of Lake Michigan, a vista that had witnessed countless corporate triumphs and crises over the years. Today, it would host the most consequential meeting in the airline's history. On one side of the mahogany conference table sat Skyway's leadership, CEO Julia Harrington, still desperately trying to salvage her company, Bradley Thompson, maintaining a facade of confidence despite the gathering storm, and 4 grim-faced board members who had flown in from across the country. On the other side sat Terrence Jackson, Zoe Washington, and Darius Jackson. The latter looking frail but unbowed, his presence a statement in itself. The billionaire had insisted on attending despite his doctor's objections, saying simply, "Some things are worth the risk." The meeting had been Skyway's idea, a last-ditch attempt to resolve the crisis before Jordan Miller's evidence became public. What they didn't know was that Terrence had already rejected their latest settlement offer. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a reckoning. Julia spoke first, her corporate polish still intact despite weeks of crisis. "We appreciate you meeting with us today. Skyway Airlines recognizes the seriousness of the incident involving our employee, and we're committed to finding a resolution that addresses your concerns." "My concerns?" Terrence repeated, his voice quiet but clear. "Ms. Harrington, this isn't about my concerns. This is about your airline's systematic discrimination against black passengers. Discrimination that you've enabled, covered up, and perpetuated." Thompson interjected, his tone condescending, "That's a serious allegation, Mr. Jackson. One employee's regrettable action doesn't constitute systematic anything." Zoe smiled thinly. "We were hoping you'd say that, Mr. Thompson." She opened her laptop and turned it to face the Skyway executives. "This is a sample of the evidence we've collected. Emails, training materials, complaint records, witness statements. All documenting a pattern of discrimination that spans at least a decade." As images and documents flashed across the screen, the blood drained from Thompson's face. Julia's professional composure cracked, her eyes widening in genuine shock as she saw internal emails she'd never been privy to. "This can't be real," she whispered. "It's very real," Zoe confirmed. "And it goes public tomorrow unless significant changes are made, starting with the people in this room." Thompson attempted to regain control, his voice taking on a harder edge. "This is corporate blackmail. You're threatening us based on stolen documents and the word of a disgruntled employee." Darius Jackson spoke for the first time, his voice weaker than in his prime but still commanding respect. "No, Mr. Thompson. This is accountability. Something your airline has avoided for far too long." The confrontation escalated as Thompson dismissed the evidence as taken out of context and suggested that Skyway was being unfairly targeted because of current social trends. He portrayed Sandra Whitmore as a scapegoat, claiming that she had acted independently and against company policy. Throughout Thompson's defensive monologue, Terrence remained silent, studying the man who had orchestrated so much pain with such casual efficiency. When Thompson finally ran out of excuses, Terrence spoke directly to Julia, ignoring Thompson entirely. "Ms. Harrington, let me tell you what it feels like to be slapped in the face because of your skin color," he began. "It's not just the physical pain. It's the humiliation. The knowledge that no matter your accomplishments, your education, your wealth, some people will only ever see you as less than human." The room fell silent as Terrence continued, his quiet dignity more powerful than any shouting could have been. "That slap wasn't isolated. It was the logical conclusion of policies your airline has cultivated for years. It happened because Sandra Whitmore believed she could get away with it, because your company had taught her she could." He gestured to the evidence displayed on Zoe's laptop. "Every black passenger who was ignored in first class, every complaint that was buried, every employee who was told to maintain standards, all of it led to that moment. The only difference is that this time, it happened to someone with the resources to fight back." Julia glanced at Thompson, doubt creeping into her expression. "Bradley, is this true? Did you know about these policies?" Before Thompson could respond, Zoe played her final card. "We think you should hear this, Ms. Harrington." She pressed play on an audio file, the recording of Thompson attempting to bribe and threaten Jordan Miller. As Thompson's voice filled the conference room, explicitly threatening a whistleblower's safety, Julia's expression transformed from doubt to horror. The board members exchanged alarmed glances. One of them, an older woman with a legal background, abruptly closed her portfolio and moved her chair slightly away from Thompson, the body language of someone distancing herself from a liability. When the recording ended, Thompson attempted one last defense. "That's been doctored. Miller set me up. The FBI doesn't think so, Zoe replied calmly. They're the ones who provided the recording equipment. Witness tampering is a federal offense, Mr. Thompson. So is obstruction of justice. As if on cue, Zoe's phone buzzed with a news alert. She turned it toward the Skyway executives, showing a breaking news headline, Skyway Airlines executive under federal investigation for witness tampering. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The board members huddled in whispered consultation while Julia stared at Thompson with growing anger, the anger of someone who suddenly realized they'd been manipulated for years. You told me these were isolated incidents, she said, her voice barely controlled. You told me Sandra was the problem. Julia, don't be naive, Thompson replied dismissively. Every airline has these issues. We just manage them better than most. Better? Julia repeated incredulously. We're facing a federal investigation, our stock has lost 40% of its value, and we've hemorrhaged corporate clients. That's your definition of better? Terrence Jackson, who had been observing quietly, addressed the board members directly. Ladies and gentlemen, you have a choice to make today. You can continue down this path, fighting a battle you will ultimately lose at tremendous cost to your company. Or you can seize this opportunity to transform Skyway into a leader in equitable treatment of all passengers. The oldest board member, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Jackson? Zoe slid a document across the table. These are our terms for resolving this matter without further public disclosure of the evidence we've gathered. The terms were comprehensive and unyielding: immediate termination of Bradley Thompson and Sandra Whitmore, a complete overhaul of training programs and complaint procedures, independent monitoring of discrimination complaints for 5 years, hiring targets for black executives and board members, a public acknowledgement of past failures, and a $50 million fund for passengers who had experienced discrimination. As the board members reviewed the document, Julia turned to Thompson. Bradley, I need you to leave this room. Security will escort you out of the building. You can't be serious, Thompson sputtered. I've given 28 years to this airline. And apparently spent most of them creating liability that could destroy us, Julia replied coldly. You're fired, effective immediately. Legal will contact you about the terms. As security led a protesting Thompson from the conference room, Julia turned back to the Jacksons and Zoe. For the first time, genuine regret showed on her face. I didn't know, she said simply. I should have, but I didn't. Ignorance isn't a defense, Terrence replied without rancor. But what you do next defines your legacy and your airline's future. Julia nodded, then addressed her board. We need to accept these terms. Not just because we're cornered, but because they're right. This is our opportunity to become the airline we've always claimed to be. The vote was unanimous. Protocol Avalanche had achieved what it was designed to do, not just address an individual incident, but transform an entire system. As they left the meeting, Darius squeezed his son's shoulder weakly. It's done, he whispered, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. But both men knew it wasn't truly done. Changing policies was just the beginning. The harder work of changing culture, of ensuring that no passenger ever again felt less than human because of their skin color, was still to come. That work would continue long after Darius was gone. It would be Terrence's to carry forward, the baton passed from one generation to the next in the long relay race toward justice. 6 months could change everything, or nothing at all. For Skyway Airlines, the half-year following the confrontation in their Chicago headquarters had brought transformation few would have believed possible. Terrence Jackson stood at the gate for Skyway Flight 1619 from San Francisco to New York, the same route where Sandra Whitmore had slapped him. The symbolism wasn't lost on him or on the airline's new leadership. This flight, numbered after the year the first enslaved Africans arrived in America, had been deliberately chosen for today's announcement. Julia Harrington approached the podium, flanked by her newly diverse executive team. At her side stood Jordan Miller, now heading Skyway's passenger advocacy department, his previous fear replaced by quiet confidence. 6 months ago, Skyway Airlines failed one of our passengers in the most fundamental way, Julia began, looking directly at the assembled press. That failure wasn't isolated or accidental. It was the result of systemic issues that we had allowed to fester throughout our organization. The CEO's candor still surprised Terrence. In his experience, corporate leaders rarely admitted fault so explicitly. But Julia had proven herself different in the months since Thompson's departure, embracing the airline's transformation with unexpected zeal. Today, we're announcing the completion of our initial reform efforts, she continued. Every Skyway employee has completed our new equity training program. Our hiring practices have been completely overhauled. Our complaints system has been rebuilt with transparent tracking and independent oversight. What Julia didn't mention was the behind-the-scenes struggle these changes had required. Conservative media had attacked the airline for surrendering to woke pressure. Long-time employees had resisted new procedures. Shareholders had questioned the costs. Throughout it all, Julia had remained steadfast, repeatedly telling her board, "This isn't just right, it's good business." The proof was in the numbers. After an initial decline, Skyway's stock had rebounded as corporate clients returned, attracted by the airline's new reputation for integrity. Customer satisfaction scores had improved across all demographics. Employee morale, after initial turbulence, had stabilized at higher levels than before the crisis. As Julia concluded her remarks, she invited Terrence to join her at the podium. Their joint appearance, the black passenger who had been assaulted and the white CEO who had committed to change, sent a powerful message about reconciliation and progress. 6 months ago, I experienced something no passenger should ever face, Terrence told the assembled press. Today, I'm here not to dwell on that incident, but to acknowledge the extraordinary effort Skyway has made to ensure it never happens again. He glanced at Jordan Miller, acknowledging the man whose courage had made this transformation possible. Jordan nodded slightly, a private communication between two people who had risked much for change. The Jackson Foundation for Transportation Equity officially recognizes Skyway Airlines as a corporate leader in anti-discrimination practices, Terrence announced. We hope other companies will follow their example, not waiting for crisis to force change, but proactively examining their own systems for bias. The foundation had been Terrence's creation, funded by the settlement he had ultimately accepted from Skyway. Money he had immediately dedicated to fighting transportation discrimination nationwide. Rather than a quiet payoff to make the problem disappear, the funds had become a catalyst for broader systemic change. After the press conference, Terrence boarded the symbolic flight, taking the same first-class seat he had occupied that fateful day. The difference in service was immediately apparent. The new flight attendant, a young black woman named Alicia, welcomed him by name with genuine warmth. When he requested water, it appeared promptly. When he asked about the meal service, she provided detailed information without hesitation. These small courtesies, the basic human dignities that white passengers had always taken for granted, represented the visible surface of deeper changes throughout the airline. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Terrence opened his laptop to review the Foundation's current projects. Their team was currently investigating discrimination patterns at bus companies, rideshare services, and car rental agencies. The methodology they used, data collection, statistical analysis, undercover testing, had been formalized from Protocol Avalanche into a replicable blueprint for accountability. His phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Jordan's training program is being adopted by 2 more airlines. Protocol Avalanche keeps spreading. Terrence smiled, thinking of his father. Darius Jackson had lived just long enough to see the initial changes at Skyway before the cancer finally claimed him 3 months earlier. At his memorial service, attended by tech luminaries and civil rights leaders alike, Terrence had promised to continue his father's work. An avalanche doesn't just knock down one tree, he had said, echoing his father's words. It reshapes the entire mountainside. The changes at Skyway represented just one reshaped slope on that mountainside. The work continued elsewhere, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden beneath the surface. As the flight neared its conclusion, Terrence noticed a young black man across the aisle, perhaps 20 years old, being served with the same casual disregard he had once experienced. The flight attendant wasn't Alicia but an older woman who had clearly missed the memo about the airline's new culture. Terrence observed for a moment, then pressed his call button. When Alicia appeared, he quietly pointed out what was happening. She nodded in understanding and disappeared briefly before returning with a supervisor. Within minutes, the situation had been addressed, the young man receiving proper service, the older flight attendant receiving a discreet but firm correction. After landing, Terrence approached the young man at the baggage claim. "I noticed what happened on the flight," he said, introducing himself. "Did things improve after the supervisor stepped in?" The young man nodded, recognition dawning as he realized who he was speaking with. "You're the one from the video. The slap that changed everything." "That's one way to put it," Terrence acknowledged with a smile. "But the change didn't come from the slap. It came from people being willing to speak up, like you should if you ever experience discrimination again." He handed the young man his business card. "My foundation helps people navigate these situations. Sometimes one call can change the system, if you have the courage to make it." As they parted ways, Terrence felt the familiar mix of sadness and determination that had characterized his life since his father's passing. The work was far from complete. For every Skyway Airlines that transformed, a dozen other companies continued business as usual. For every Sandra Whitmore who faced consequences, hundreds of others continued to discriminate with impunity. But systems could change. Mountains could be reshaped. His father had believed that, had staked his legacy on it. Now it was Terrence's turn to carry that belief forward, to keep the Avalanche moving until the landscape of American society was transformed beyond recognition. On his way out of the airport, he passed a Skyway Airlines advertisement that would have been unimaginable a year earlier, a black family being welcomed into first class by a smiling flight attendant, with the tagline, "Everyone deserves first-class treatment." It was a small victory in a much larger war. But sometimes, small victories were enough to keep fighting another day. This powerful story teaches us that systemic change requires both courage and strategy. Individual incidents of racism aren't isolated, they're symptoms of deeper institutional problems that thrive in silence. True transformation demands more than just addressing single acts of discrimination, it requires exposing and dismantling the entire system that enables them. What makes Protocol Avalanche so effective isn't just the Jackson family's wealth and power, it's their understanding that lasting change happens when hidden practices are brought to light. Jordan Miller shows us that allies within broken systems are essential for meaningful reform. His willingness to risk everything illustrates how one person's courage can tip the scales toward justice. Perhaps most importantly, the story reminds us that fighting discrimination is a generational relay race. Darius passes the baton to Terrence, who will eventually pass it to others. No single person completes the journey alone, but each moves the line forward, reshaping the mountainside one avalanche at a time. Has there been a moment when you witnessed discrimination but weren't sure how to respond? What would your Protocol Avalanche look like if you created one today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more stories that expose uncomfortable truths about racism in America. Share this with someone who needs to understand why isolated incidents are rarely isolated. Thank you for being part of a community that refuses to look away when injustice happens. Together, we can create avalanches of change that reshape our world. Until next time, remember that sometimes one call can change the system, if you have the courage to make it.